You feel it, don't you? That restless stirring deep inside your chest. The quiet ache that whispers, there has to be more than this. You move through your days, busy, distracted, rushing from one task to another, but somewhere beneath the noise, your soul is hungry. Hungry for meaning, hungry for fire, hungry for God. And that hunger is not an accident. It is a gift. It is the seed of revival. Revival is not a ghost from the past. It is not something buried in old books about church history, spoken of only in hushed tones about people long gone. Revival is now. Revival is living. Revival is when heaven breaks into your ordinary life, when the Spirit of God shakes you awake from spiritual sleep and sets your soul burning again. And it always, always begins with prayer. Not polite prayers, not safe prayers, but desperate, broken heart cry prayers that say, God, if you don't move, I'm done. If you don't breathe on me again, I cannot go on. The Bible tells you this again and again. 2 Chronicles 7:14 declares, If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, and I will forgive their sin and will heal their land. Do you hear the promise in that verse? God is not waiting for governments or institutions. He is waiting for His people. He is waiting for you. He says, if you humble yourself, if you pray, if you turn from what is killing you, then I will come. I will forgive. I will heal. Revival doesn't begin in palaces. It begins in prayer closets. Think of Elijah. He stood on Mount Carmel facing 400 prophets of Baal. The nation had turned away. They had forgotten their God, chasing idols, living distracted and divided lives. But Elijah prayed. Just one man, trembling yet unshaken, daring to believe that God still answers. He called down fire from heaven, and God sent it. The flames fell, and suddenly the people who had been wandering cried out together. The Lord, He is God. Revival came not because the crowd was ready, but because one voice was desperate enough to pray. Do you see it? One voice of prayer can be the spark for national awakening. Could your voice be that spark? Could your prayer set your family on fire? Could your cry stir your city awake? History bears witness to this pattern. In the 18th century, when England was drowning in corruption, despair, and drunkenness, a handful of men and women, John Wesley, George Whitefield, and others, did not start with politics or strategies. They started with prayer. They gathered in hidden rooms, pleading with God to come. And out of those small gatherings came the Great Awakening. Thousands wept for their sins. Nations shifted. Hope rose again. The same God who bent the course of history through their prayers is the God who listens to yours tonight. His ear is not deaf. His arm is not short. He waits for you to cry out. But you ask, what does this mean for your daily life? How does revival connect with the mess on your desk, the stress in your home, the temptations you hide in the dark? Revival is not just a far-off event in stadiums or churches. It is God making Himself real in the places you walk every day. When you pray for awakening, you are not asking for something abstract. You are asking for your own heart to be purified, for your relationships to be healed, for your workplace to shine with integrity, for light to break into the dark corners of your story. Prayer for revival is not just about crowds, it's about you, about the Spirit flooding your life so deeply that others can't help but notice that something has changed. Jesus said in Matthew 5:14, "You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden." Revival is God polishing the lamp of your life until it shines again. Maybe your light has dimmed. Maybe disappointment, routine, or secret compromise has buried your flame under dust. But through prayer, through hunger, God breathes on you again. And that little flicker inside you becomes a blazing witness. People who once saw you as ordinary begin to notice the extraordinary presence of God shaping your words, your kindness, your courage. That is how revival moves from prayer to daily life. I think of a story from decades ago in Korea, a small church, poor, unknown, overlooked. A handful of believers gathered every morning before sunrise, kneeling in the cold, their voices cracking with fatigue. They prayed for their nation. They begged for revival. They prayed with tears, often with nothing more than groans. And God answered. Out of those fragile gatherings grew one of the greatest Christian movements in modern history, with millions turning to Christ. What changed history was not wealth, not power, not strategies, but prayer, simple, desperate prayer. And the same God who moved then is still listening now. He is listening to you. So where do you start? You start right where you are. You don't need perfect words. You don't need a platform. You need a hungry heart. Maybe you are a mother, overwhelmed with children whispering a prayer between dishes and diapers. Maybe you are a student, suffocating under pressure, muttering, "God help me." Maybe you are a businessman in temptation, praying quietly. Keep me true. Heaven bends low to hear those prayers. Revival does not wait for perfect conditions. Revival waits for willing hearts. Paul wrote in Romans 13:11, "The hour has already come for you to wake up from your slumber, because our salvation is nearer now than when we first believed." Do you hear the urgency in his words? Wake up. The time is short. Revival is not about waiting for tomorrow. It is about waking up today. Every time you choose prayer over distraction, every time you whisper his name when no one sees, every time you resist compromise and cling to holiness, you are fanning the flame of revival. But revival prayer is not just about you. It is never meant to stop at your heart. Real awakening spreads like fire. One spark touches another, and soon the whole forest is in flames. That is how God has always worked. Think of the book of Acts. The disciples were ordinary men, scarred by fear, hiding in an upper room. They had no wealth, no armies, no influence. But they had prayer. They waited together, desperate longing for God to move. And then Pentecost came. The Spirit of God filled that room like a rushing wind, and suddenly these weak men became bold witnesses. Peter, who once denied Jesus, stood before thousands and preached with fire. 3,000 souls were saved that day. Revival was born in a prayer meeting, and it has not stopped since. You wonder sometimes if your prayers matter. You whisper in the dark, and it feels like nothing changes. But prayer is never wasted. Every cry, every groan, every tear you lift to heaven is gathered like incense before God. Revelation 5:8 paints this picture: golden bowls filled with the prayers of the saints rising before the throne. Your prayer is not lost in the air. It is stored in heaven. And when the time is right, God tips the bowls, and the fire falls. Do not stop because you do not see. Keep knocking, keep crying, keep believing, because revival is often born in the hidden places where no one sees but God. There was a story in the Hebrides Islands off the coast of Scotland in the 1940s. The churches were empty, the youth were cold to the gospel, and despair hung heavy in the air. But two old women, blind and frail, decided they would not give up. They prayed every night in their little cottage. For months, nothing seemed to change. But one night, as they prayed, they felt God's presence so strongly that they knew revival was coming. Soon after, a young preacher came to the island. Meetings began, and the Spirit fell. People walking along the roads suddenly fell to their knees under conviction. Homes lit up with midnight prayers. The island was shaken. And it all began with the prayers of two forgotten women. That is the power of revival prayer. It does not matter how strong you feel, how influential you are, how polished your words sound. What matters is your hunger, your faith, your persistence. So, what does this mean for your relationships? When you pray for revival, you are asking God to heal the fractures in your home. Maybe your marriage feels like two strangers under one roof. Maybe your children are wandering. Maybe unforgiveness has poisoned your friendships. Revival begins when you pray, "Lord, soften my heart first. Change me before I demand you change them." Prayer for revival is not about fixing others. It is about letting God make you new. And when He does, the ripple spreads. A tender word replaces anger. A patient silence replaces shouting. A humble apology opens a door that had been locked for years. That is revival in daily life, God's Spirit rewriting the script of your relationships. At work, revival prayer looks like integrity in the small things. You are tempted to cut corners, to compromise, for profit, to gossip, when everyone else does. But when you pray for revival, you begin to sense the Spirit whisper, "Choose honesty. Choose light." And you do. Over time, your coworkers notice something different. They may not call it revival, but they see the fire of God shaping your choices. And that quiet witness can awaken questions in their own hearts. Prayer for revival always begins personal, but it never stays private. Think also about your inner battles. Those private struggles you hope no one ever finds out about. The habits that chain you, the shame that whispers, "You will never change." Prayer for revival is where the prison doors begin to crack. It is where the Spirit breathes courage into your weakness and strength into your surrender. You cannot break free on your own. You have tried. But when you pray, when you throw yourself at the mercy of God, you invite a power greater than your addiction, greater than your fear, greater than your shame. That is revival. Not just crowds shouting in church buildings, but captives set free in the quiet of their bedrooms. I remember reading about the Jesus movement in the 1970s. Young people across America were disillusioned. They chased pleasure drugs, rebellion, but nothing satisfied. And then, in pockets across the nation, revival broke out. Not through polished programs, but through prayer. Groups of young believers gathered on beaches, in coffee shops, in living rooms. They prayed for their generation, and God answered. Thousands came to Christ. Broken lives were healed, and the movement spread like wildfire. What triggered it was not a strategy, but hunger and prayer. And God is no respecter of generations. What He did then, He can do now through you. And here is the insight you must carry. Revival is costly. It will demand something of you. It will press you to lay down your pride, your comfort, your plans. It will call you to confess what you would rather hide, to forgive those you would rather punish, to obey when it costs you. That is why prayer is so crucial, because in prayer, God prepares your heart for the weight of awakening. He bends your will, He purifies your motives, He strengthens your resolve. Without prayer, revival becomes a fleeting excitement. With prayer, revival becomes a lasting transformation. So, I ask you, are you willing to pray like that? Are you willing to trade convenience for hunger, distraction for devotion, pride for desperation? Revival does not come to the casual. It comes to the desperate. It comes to those who cry in the night, "Lord, rend the heavens and come down." It comes to those who are willing to be broken vessels so that God's glory can shine through the cracks. And if you are willing, even trembling, even uncertain, then you are ready. Because revival does not wait for the strong. It waits for the surrendered. There is a moment in every revival story when the atmosphere shifts. At first it feels hidden, fragile, almost invisible. A few voices crying in the dark, a few hearts stirred with holy restlessness. But then, like dawn breaking after the longest nightlight begins to spread, hearts soften, tears fall, chains break, and suddenly, what once felt impossible becomes undeniable. That is how revival always comes. Slowly, quietly, then suddenly, like a flood, you cannot stop. And here's the truth that should pierce you. It can begin with you. The prophet Habakkuk once prayed, "Lord, I have heard of your fame. I stand in awe of your deeds. Renew them in our day, in our time, make them known. In wrath, remember mercy." Habakkuk 3:2. That prayer is as alive today as it was then. When you look around and see a world fractured, distracted, and drowning in noise, don't you feel the same cry rising? Lord, do it again. What you did in Elijah's day, in the Apostles' day, in Wesley's day, do it again. But don't just do it around me, do it in me. That is the beginning of true awakening. Not pointing at the darkness around you, but opening your own heart and saying, "Lord, start here." Think of Jonah. He ran from God, hardened by fear and resentment. Yet when he finally yielded and cried out in the belly of that fish, God answered. Jonah was restored, and through his reluctant obedience, a whole city repented. Or think of the thief on the cross moments from death who whispered the simplest of prayers, "Jesus, remember me." And Jesus answered with revival in his final breath, "Today, you will be with me in paradise." Do you see the pattern? Revival is never too far gone, never too late, never too impossible. All it takes is one desperate prayer, one surrendered heart. Maybe you feel like you are too broken, too weary, too far gone for revival. But you are exactly the kind of person God loves to awaken. The very cracks in your life become the places His light shines brightest. When you admit your weakness, when you fall on your knees and confess your hunger, you create space for God to do what only He can. And suddenly, what felt like ashes begins to glow again. That is revival, personal and powerful. Look back at the Welsh revival in 1904. It began with a young coal miner named Evan Roberts, who could not escape the burden to pray for his nation. He gathered young people, and they prayed with 4 simple cries. "Bend us, Lord. Fill us with your Spirit. Save the lost. Send revival." That was it. No elaborate strategies, no glamorous stages. Just hunger. Within months, tens of thousands came to Christ. Taverns closed. Police officers had little work because crime collapsed. Families were restored. It was not a movement of man. It was the answer to prayer. And it began with one young man who dared to pray, "Lord, bend me." What would happen if you prayed the same? And don't miss this revival is not about chasing emotional highs. It is not about goosebumps or moments of intensity that fade by Monday morning. Revival is about transformation. It is about holiness reborn in ordinary lives. It is about men and women who used to live for themselves, now living for God. It is about generosity replacing greed, purity replacing corruption, compassion replacing apathy. True revival does not leave you the same. It rewrites your habits, reshapes your desires, refocuses your life. And that change begins with prayer. So tonight, when the noise quiets and you are alone with your thoughts, dare to pray differently. Don't just pray, "God bless me." Pray, "God, awaken me." Don't just ask for comfort, ask for fire. Don't just ask for safety, ask for surrender. Whisper like Isaiah did, "Here am I, send me," and then watch what God does, because He always answers the heart that truly seeks Him. He always fills the hungry. He always revives the desperate. And now it comes to you. What will you do with this invitation? You have heard the stories. You have seen the scriptures. You have felt the tug in your own chest. Revival is not a theory. It is a choice. Will you stay comfortable, distracted asleep, or will you kneel and cry out until heaven bends low? Will you risk the cost of surrender to taste the beauty of awakening? Because here is the hope you must cling to. God is not done with this generation. He is not done with your family. He is not done with you. Even if the headlines scream despair, even if your own heart feels numb, revival is possible. And it begins the moment you choose prayer over passivity, hunger over apathy, surrender over pride. The question is not whether God will move. The question is whether you will pray. So let me leave you with this call. Tonight, find a quiet place. Put aside the distractions, silence the noise, and lift your heart to heaven. Say, "Lord, wake me up." Start revival in me. And then keep praying. Tomorrow, pray again. When you feel nothing, pray again. When you feel weary, pray again. Because every prayer builds an altar, and one day the fire of God will fall. And when it does, you will not only be changed, you will become a spark for others. Your family will see it. Your co-workers will notice it. Your friends will be drawn to it. And from your simple prayer, God can awaken a movement. That is the miracle of revival. It always begins with one. Why not you? If this message has stirred something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Speak it. Let others know that God is calling us back to prayer, back to hunger, back to life. And if you long to hear more words that draw you closer to Him, subscribe, stay connected, and walk this journey together. But most of all, pray. Right now, tonight. Because revival is not waiting for tomorrow. Revival begins the moment you kneel.